Hello.
Hello.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, everything seems to be working fine miraculously.
Oh, great.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Sorry about the issues that you were having. I've had the same thing with Discord, just for some reason it cuts off my audio when I enter new calls. Sometimes it's strange.
Yeah, it's a common issue. Discord otherwise runs pretty well though, so I'm happy with it.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Well, I guess like first and foremost, I appreciate you, like coming to talk to me. Like I've not got like a considerable platform like yourself, so it's good of you to like take the time to talk
Oh
about things.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's really important to be willing to talk to
Hmm.
just about everybody. As long as people are polite. I have a real issue with people being rude or disrespectful. I just won't talk to them. But
Yes.
people have this thing where like if you're like a professor, then you're just too important to talk to people, and I hate that vibe. I hate that attitude.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
so yeah,
Yeah,
on
so
my channel, it doesn't matter if I was decked in Nobel prizes in philosophy. It's not a thing, but I'm still gonna have random people call in. I don't care.
yeah.
I don't like elitism. I never have.
Yeah, I really like respect that a lot. Because I've been watching your content for I want to say like maybe the past 2 or 3, coming up 3 years. I've not like watched you extensively, but I've always thought you were really good at sort of. You're primarily you work in like you're a meta ethicist, is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean it's a question of education versus what I personally study, and I personally study
Yeah.
primarily metaethics.
Yes.
But as far as like formal training goes,
Yeah.
it's mostly psychology. But people underestimate what you do in a master's program in philosophy. The only difference between a terminal master's and a
Hmm.
PhD is the dissertation phase. So
Hmm.
I did all the coursework that a typical PhD in philosophy has done. I just didn't do my dissertation under the direct supervision of a philosopher as the chair. But I had 4 people in my committee. 3 of them are in the philosophy department.
Oh, wow.
They're a lot of them are co-listed in the psychology and philosophy. So like Sean Nichols was in my committee. He's
Hmm.
in the philosophy department, and he's a rather prominent figure in experimental philosophy. So um,
Yeah.
my training, supervision, and education is just heavily enmeshed
Hmm.
both philosophy and psychology, and it's hard for people to get a sense of that kind of education if they look at it on paper, because I think they misunderstand
Yeah.
what a master's degree entails,
Hmm.
or they don't care, and they see psychology and they think, oh, he must know a bunch of stuff about statistics and not so much philosophy, and that's not true.
Yes. Yeah.
I should probably know less of the statistics. A lot of the people in psychology had just much more of an emphasis on the technical aspects of psychology, and I was never as strong in those areas as they are.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. It's good to get like a bit of background. I suppose meta ethics is the sort of subject of philosophy, that I've been and the branch of ethics that I've been sort of studying the most. And I wouldn't say I'm anywhere near like what I would describe as well read on it, but at least I have the basic ideas of some concepts down, and I'm always willing to engage with it. But I guess one thing I wanted to talk to you about is I know that you lean heavily towards, as far as I know, like I don't want to misquote you or mischaracterize your view, but towards like anti-realism and this sort of like stance-dependent sort of interpretation of like moral values. And I was wondering like what that looks like for you, like if you could, because I've definitely seen a lot of. I saw your debate with like I think it was David Enoch, for example, or Enoch, however
yeah,
you
yeah,
pronounce
I've
it.
had two
Yeah.
debates with them actually. I don't know if you saw the
Yeah.
earlier one. I had a recent one and a one from a few years ago.
I think I thought saw the recent one with him, and are you referring to you had 2 debates with him? Sorry.
Yeah, I've had two
Yeah.
discussions with David Enoch, and the other one was a
Yeah.
couple of years ago.
Yeah, I've only seen the most recent one, I believe. But I did find that instead, if I'm not mistaken, does he sort of hold to like some sort of like Platonic, like non-naturalist realism or something?
He's a non-naturalist realist.
Yeah.
He calls himself a robust realist, and he sometimes
Yeah.
jokingly refers to himself as like a
Yeah.
extremist realist. He's being silly when he says that.
Yeah.
He's not an extremist. So
Yeah.
that's the language he uses. I don't think so you do have these contemporary realists like Parfit and Scanlon
Yeah.
who try to minimize some of the metaphysical commitments of
Yeah.
non-naturalist realism,
Hmm.
and they would issue Platonism for sure. Like that's
Yeah.
part of the point.
Yeah.
I don't know where Enoch stands on that, but if I had to place him, he's probably more on the Platonic side of things.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense because I do lean towards realism personally, but I don't necessarily like hold to any kind of. I think what confuses me is these ideas of sort of well, it almost feels like the way that the way that someone could go about defending realism is simply by sort of placing these like moral facts or simply seeing these moral facts as being descriptive or in some sort of like inaccessible like Platonic realm. Whereas I think I see it more in a relational sense, and I'd be more than willing to like see allow you to sort of poke some holes and see like where I might be getting like
Sure.
off the track. But the way that I'm understanding it is that I guess my own view is that how can I like word this like so I think that agency is going to be something that's indicative of like identifying like moral facts and like for instance the only moral fact that I can really think of that would be a substantive one for me would be like something like suffering is bad or something like that. And I don't mean to say that that's just definitionally the case, but of course in a descriptive and like an experiential sense, because I think I see bad, like if we're taking bad at face value, it's going to be like a primitive. It's kind of hard, like the only way we seem to speak of bad is if it's in virtue of like some, thicker like moral concept, like for instance suffering or cruelty or something like that. So the way that I'm thinking about it is that agency sort of there's states of affairs in the world or in your own experience. There's certain valent states that you experience, and those valent states instantiate a stance towards themselves, right? It might sound a bit convoluted, but hopefully you see what I'm getting at. And yeah, so I sort of think about it, I guess in like a it might sound trivial to yourself, but I think about it in like a euthyphro sense. Like, is this state of affairs, like this, this suffering I'm undergoing, is it bad because I have a stance towards it, or do I have a stance towards it because it is bad? And of course, bad becomes almost quite mystical in that sense. Like, it's hard to even define it, but perhaps it's something that is not, in my view, like, it's almost like I don't attempt to define it. It's just something that's made immediate. It's almost like brute. It's like synthetic in a sense. Yeah, like it's
Yeah.
context dependent. So that's the way that I'm understanding it. And the last thing I would say maybe for now is that I kind of compare it to like I think Akil Bilgrami makes a good example where he talks about like when to try and he's not necessarily arguing just for moral realism but rather value realism, and he'll say that
Yeah.
when someone asks you like do you believe that it's raining, you usually assess the state of affairs in the world, and then that sort of makes some sort of, I'm not sure if it'd be like a normative commitment, or at least it would be what instantiates your belief towards it raining, rather than scanning your interiors and like figuring out whether it's raining. And then the same could be said of like desirability, like do you desire this apple because you have like a positive stance towards it, or does it have all of the like good making properties, such as like I don't know what it would be, like fructose molecules and glucose molecules that in a relational sense interact with your taste receptors, and then sort of at that point on you sort of have this I guess you could say you could use the language of preferences and things like that, but it feels feasible to say there's a difference between a preference for like slaughtering mass amounts of children and a preference for apples over cherries or something. But yeah, I'm just wondering what you think about all that and how you'd go about sort of responding or yeah.
Yeah. Perhaps you could help me with understanding.
Yeah.
Like, is this a moral realist position, and what you take that to mean?
Yeah.
And that I could kind of work from there. And if you want me to
Yeah.
approach things from my angle, like what it is I reject, I could end up describing.
Sure.
Here's what I reject, and you could say I don't even hold that view. Because,
Yes,
and
yeah.
I'll just say this last thing to preface what you'll say is that my objections are to a very specific and a relatively narrow conception of realism.
Okay.
And sometimes some of the construals people present to me, I may not accept them, but my standard line of argumentation of the reasons why I don't accept them would differ
Yeah.
from the reasons why I don't accept your sort of standard
Yeah.
Parfidian realism.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think that sounds like a good strategy, a good way we could go about it, and perhaps like would it be okay with you if we touched on like the sort of the? I guess we could differentiate between like valence and stance, right? Like, do you think like I guess
Sure.
yeah, like if you think that the valence would be something that is you know because I guess let me ask you this. It might sound like a trivial question, but what do you take like a stance to be? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's actually a very good question.
Yeah.
I will
Hmm.
say I did not invent the terminology of
Yeah.
stance
Yeah.
dependent or independent, and
Hmm.
so you have these terms like stance
Hmm.
that look like well-devised technical terms,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's not so clear anybody has actually done the work to
Hmm.
rigorously devise,
Hmm.
some conception of these notions
Hmm.
that works well, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
So the term stance. Do you know much about like the history of where the stance talk came from?
I don't believe so. Like I mainly think about stances in terms of like I've read a bit of like Hume and I sort of I do take like internalism seriously and the idea that our stances do play a very large role in sort of well I should say that motivation as well plays a very big role. But I don't know like the ins and outs of like exactly where like you might be able to like help me with that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward
Yeah.
and kind of disappointing.
Hmm.
And so you have the term mind independent,
Yeah.
and that was one of the most common terms used in association with moral realism
Yes.
for quite a while. But sometime in the 90s, Russ Schaefer Landau started using the term stance independent,
Hmm.
and I and others started picking up on that, and it became more popular. Um,
Yeah.
Largely because people would make silly mistakes um, when it
Hmm.
came to understanding what mind independent meant.
Yeah.
So people would take mind independent, like, oh, moral truth is mind independent, to mean like, oh, well, then utilitarianism couldn't be true because utilitarianism depends on how much happiness is caused
Yeah.
by your actions.
Yeah.
And that's a fundamental misunderstanding. What they're not understanding is that the truth of the first order normative propositions, it means that those are not made true by our stances.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, once you have settled, here's a first order normative claim, like suffering, all else being equal, like ceteris paribus is bad,
Yeah.
then, or you ought to maximize utility, is that's true.
Yeah.
Once that's established, okay, sure. Now there's going to be facts about how, like, there are going to be facts about those truths depending on minds, but that's just a different that's just a different level
Yeah.
of analysis, and so
Yeah.
there's just a misunderstanding. So people shifted towards stance independent to help sort of clarify that. At least that's my understanding of the history. I don't know that anyone's really discussed the history, but
Hmm.
that's what I've surmised from looking at it. That's it. And
Okay.
then as far as
Yeah.
what is a stance, there's not like some agreed upon technical conception of what a stance is. It's just a
Yeah.
term people started using to help clarify what we're trying to say.
Yeah. That's good. Thanks for clearing that up because I think I often intuitively think of stances as being almost synonymous, or maybe they're a slight alteration between a stance and like a preference. But because I know that there's certain things, of course, like I can't sort of willingly choose to have a preference for like, you know, a very long nail going through like my foot as opposed to having an ice cream or something, you know. But
Yeah.
yeah, like, but I do think that the the way that I've been thinking about stance independent is that there's some well, we can take some current state of affair in the world, like some child is undergoing like agony or something, and that agony is bad for the child, and you maybe would agree with this that it wouldn't matter what my stance towards that state of affairs of the child's like suffering. It would my stance wouldn't be something that would make that suffering in that valent state good, right? Maybe good for me in a sense, but I could be. It's hard to say because it's like, can I be mistaken about what I deem to be good in my own sort of cognitive state? Or like, am I just blatantly wrong in that, or am I delusional, or is it simply because I don't think it's tracking reality in the correct way? But I mean, is bad even something that's meaningfully defined? Is something I think about a lot as well, because the bad, again, because I think it's synthetic. Like a lot of people, I think, take my view to be saying that they think that I'm saying that suffering and badness are identical in some sort of like analytical naturalist sense, but I don't hold to that at all. Like yeah, like I have a hard time like sort of getting it across, but maybe because of my normative ethics, maybe I feel like there's some. there are some implications from meta ethics because I find that in a lot of debates that I have, or just conversations that I have, typically like we'll be talking about we'll be touching on normative ethics, and then it will derail into like meta ethics when it feels unnecessary, and people will say, well, I just don't really care, you know, like I just don't have a preference, and I can't really make them care. Like I'm almost attracted to the view that that Iris Murdoch had, in a sense that like morality is about like seeing clearly, and it's you know, there's examples of you know, we sort of deem certain things as regarding like gaining knowledge, and other things are, you know, if it's in a very we think of abstraction and analytical things as like forms of knowledge, but not necessarily empathizing with some sort of starving dog in the road, right? Like and noticing the vulnerability as opposed to someone that finds it hilarious and mocks it, you know. And yeah, so I kind of wonder whether arguments in this sort of syllogistic sense are even like, maybe it's going slightly off topic a bit, but you know, like I wonder whether it's actually, I'm not sure that it's motivating unless someone has a sentiment to be rational, you know. So I sort of, I do like, I think I agree with like Hume, you know, that like reason is a slave of the passions, you know. But just sort of yeah, I'm just sort of quizzing myself on that, because do you think yourself, I guess I could ask you this, I apologize for going in many different directions, I'm kind of like ADHD,
Oh
but
no, it's totally fine.
yeah, I just wanted to ask you like whether you think that like there are good reasons to be a moral realist that have normative implications, or whether you think it's just sort of mental masturbation. Yeah.
You're asking if I think there's good reasons to be a realist?
Yeah.
I think, like, if you're like, whether you have a good reason is going to be situational. It's going to be contingent on the rest of your beliefs, your attitudes, your commitments. So like whether you have a good reason will be partially determined by like all the rest of your views.
Yeah.
You know, if you were raised in a very enclosed environment where everybody else is way smarter than you and they're all realists, and they're all like, oh, realism is obviously true.
Yeah.
Probably it would make sense to be a realist.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and you could imagine some more complicated circumstance where it would like there you'd have good reason to be a realist. So, if you're talking about it in a sense where we allow this sort of contingent and variable features of human experience to influence things, then trivially, you could have a good reason to believe the Earth is flat. You know.
Yeah.
You know, imagine you're raised in an isolated cult, and that's what everybody has always said all the time. Okay, well now it makes sense to think that.
Yeah.
But that's probably that's not a very interesting kind of it makes sense.
Yeah.
I think the more interesting one would be, would it make sense to be a realist in a dialectical context in which we're reasonably well informed and using decent methodological tools, that sort of thing. And in that case, I would say probably not.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's hard for me to say because I think that people's individual psychology is such an important factor.
Yeah.
In how we judge what they should think that I'm hesitant to just say no, it's not reasonable.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I have a particularly interesting answer there.
Yeah.
And part of that is because you know, I'm a pragmatist, and so you know, I think that there's an ineliminable perspectival element to all of our views on everything, and different people are at different points in terms of the overall holistic set of beliefs and commitments and attitudes that they have. And a belief that wouldn't make sense for me to hold would make sense for someone to hold in a different context. And I don't think like, oh, it's just locally expedient despite their ignorance. No, I think different modes of life, there are genuinely different ways of different things make sense in those contexts.
Yeah, no, I think.
Sorry to give a convoluted answer.
No.
It's just I don't think there's a straightforward way for me.
Yeah, I think that was actually informative because I do think that our own individual psychology plays a large part, and we can even just think like ontologically. Like I think often this is going back a bit to stance independence and mind independence. I think maybe we would be in agreement that there are good ways to argue for realism and bad ways to argue for realism, and good ways to argue for anti-realism and bad ways to argue for anti-realism. And I think I've had a lot of people that like I've always had strong intuitions for like anti-realism when I was very sort of ill-informed on like meta-ethical terminology, but I always just felt it just seemed obvious to me, you know, that well, morality is going to be dependent on your cognitive states, like one person thinks X is bad, another person thinks X is good. Who are we to say it was objectively right? That was always very intuitive to me. And then I started, I guess, the more I think about it, I guess there's like these potential weaker forms of realism. I mean, maybe like Sam Harris would be an example of sort of, he just talks about like epistemic, like stance independence, right? Or epistemic objectivity. And I don't know, I almost get confused how he's going about that. Like, I almost feel like what he's saying could have some pragmatic, like positive implications if it were the case that we could discover like what neural networks fire at certain times that would instantiate like a case of suffering, and we could like mitigate that. That would be great, but I don't think that tells us that like we should do that, you know.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
Sam Harris is not somebody I would turn to on this
yeah,
topic. I think he's one of the most confused people of anybody on the topic and barely knows what he's talking about. So
yeah,
I would
yeah,
avoid him.
yeah. Like, I think the not like the sort of I don't know. I've seen him talking with well, I won't get too much into Sam Harris, but that was sort of like, I've known a lot of people that have been introduced to meta ethics because of him, even though he's very sort of like opposed to actually talking about meta ethics. He apparently says so, but I think, yeah, it's quite peculiar how you'll notice he'll say something like, you know, we can do away with like normative talk and just talk about descriptions, but then he'll say that like that would be a better state of affairs, and I'm not sure what he thinks better is other than like a normative term. um, so yeah, I get confused with these kind of like Peter Railton, and you might be familiar with him as well.
Yep.
Yeah, Railton, and like, because I read his paper on moral realism, and you know, like I think it's a very well written, like almost essay on on like naturalist realism, reductive naturalist realism. But then there's certain elements of it where you're like, okay, so he's trying to kind of strip sentiments and your own personal stances away from these objective moral values that are purely descriptive. But the only reason that you would, your future, or sorry, your idealized self, would care about, you know, sort of having I think he uses like the milk example, like milk that's non-curdling or water in the desert or whatever. You know, the only reason that you sort of break this down, you're like, well, the only reason that I would want to have water to quench my thirst is because that I would, you know, have that necessary desire and stance towards it, you know. So it's kind of unusual the ways that they try to break it down just into purely descriptions. And then there's like synthetic naturalism, I suppose, or rather non-reductive. But that always feels reductive in some meaningful sense still to me, because
It does to me too.
yeah, yeah,
They want it to be non-reductive. I'm
yeah,
not convinced that it is.
yeah,
I mean, and non-naturalist realists certainly aren't impressed
that's
with
right. Yeah,
non-reductive accounts like a Cornell realism and that kind of thing.
yeah, that's right.
Um,
Yeah, because that was a view that I was as originally attracted to, and then I started reading more non-naturalism and Bill Grami's paper on like the visibility of value, one of his papers, and I was like, okay, maybe I should look more towards non-naturalism. And it's almost like I just find I think maybe I'm just confused on meta ethics. Like it feels like a really convoluted subject, you know. Yeah, so
Unfortunately, it very
yeah,
much is, and
yeah,
a lot of it is because people are still looking at
hmm,
analytic philosophy without
yeah,
fully appreciating that you don't have to approach
hmm,
meta ethics from a perspective totally just immersed in the 20th century dialectic.
yeah, yeah,
That 20th century dialectic just steeped everything
hmm,
in all this weird stuff about semantics and language. I mean, it's a very strange thing
yeah,
that all of the major positions are characterized in terms of their semantics.
yeah,
Why?
yeah, yeah,
And there are historical reasons why that's the case, and it has to do with the methods like conceptual analysis and stuff that emerged in the 20th century,
yeah,
and the idea that we would get insight into, like, basically it's okay, so we have all these metaphysical questions, but we need to fix the referent of what we're referring to, so we need
hmm,
to know what people are talking about when they make moral claims, and then we're going to use this armchair methodology of
yeah,
working through these sentences and figuring out the semantic content of them. And certainly doing polls isn't going to work, and I agree, I don't think polls
yeah,
do work very well.
yeah,
So I think philosophers are right, at least in a way, maybe right for the wrong reasons. So we use these methods, okay, and then we figure out what these sentences mean, and then once we know that, that'll tell us, kind of like The morning star and the evening star refer to the same object. Okay, well, we got to figure out what our terms refer to.
Yeah.
And then that will allow us to then start asking those metaphysical questions, which are contingent
Yeah.
on those semantic questions.
Yeah.
So there's a rationale to it that's not like insane. It makes sense. But then you get all this focus on sentences. And it's like, aren't we asking a metaphysical question here? Why are you focused so much on sentences?
Yeah.
And but that's what happened, and I think that's part of the weirdness. Fortunately, very very slowly, we're moving away from conceptual analysis as findings from cognitive science and stuff have trickled in, and
Yeah.
someone like Mike Humer, who I disagree with on almost everything. I completely agree with him when he says stuff like, "There's never been a successful conceptual analysis."
Yeah.
Right? So he'll say, like, no, okay, what are the sufficient and necessary conditions for what makes something a sandwich? Like, we can't even figure that out. You think we're
Yeah.
going to figure it out for some technical concept? There's no chance.
Yeah.
And the reason for that isn't because there is a deep truth and it's just too hard to figure out. It's because language and concepts just don't work that way.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, much of metaethics is still locked in to that 20th century paradigm and hasn't really escaped from it yet. And so the standard positions on the table are still framed in terms of those old views about semantics and the relation to human concepts. And it just keeps getting recapitulated in textbooks and articles over and over and over. So on the one hand, you have Humer correctly recognized there are no successful conceptual analyses. So, like Wittgenstein got a little bit of a victory with your mainstream rationalist analytic philosophers. And yet he still goes around saying there's only 5 possible positions, and then frames everything in terms of the your typical analytic semantic based framing.
Yeah.
So he gets like part of it right, but not the rest of it, and that's quite frustrating.
Yes.
And that's contemporary analytic metaethics in a nutshell. Is that it's slowly getting little bits and pieces right, but it's getting them right, kicking and screaming kind of incidentally. It's not saying, hey, how can we take a step back from how we're approaching metaethics and consider whether we need fundamentally different methodological approaches to how we're even doing all this. They want to cling to the methodology, and then little bits and pieces are slowly getting torn away as they just don't work, and it just takes decades of it not working for people. And so the changes are happening piecemeal in an unsystematic way that isn't rooted in any overarching principles. It's just this like little bits and pieces, and that's quite frustrating.
Yeah. I think you touched on something real there, and I hear what you're saying. I think like, I almost maybe that's why I'm attracted to I hate like the sort of phrase of I ground my ethics in something, but in the sense that I feel like when I think of ethics, I'm primarily thinking about it's so how can I phrase this, like I mean suffering springs to mind. Like I am attracted to these sort of like Buddhist interpretations of suffering, just like we sort of and I feel like even as much as I hate to say it, I feel like Schopenhauer was onto something with that, like suffering being this like the positive default sort of state. And I think, I wonder if like I hope you wouldn't mind, but because I personally I feel like my meta-ethics and my normative ethics is kind of like it's all bound up and entangled with like the fact that I am vegan. And I enjoy having like discourse on veganism and trying to like understand like ethics through that lens, because I'm someone that I am a vegan personally, and I don't necessarily always like using that term just because it has so many negative connotations, unfortunately. But I guess I'm unusual in the sense that I don't really like the terminology of moral status. I feel like it already has like sort of presupposes this like hierarchical way of thinking. And I don't like, which is sort of intrinsic to our nature of being humans. I think we do naturally think in terms of hierarchy, and I would likely save a loved one of a family member over like a random pig or cow. But I do want to sort of, I guess what I'm getting at is that Yeah, the way I look at suffering, and I want to ask you whether you see suffering as like, I guess I can keep it very simple. Like, do you think that suffering as a state in and of itself is, and bad, or if you think that's kind of meaningless question to ask? Because I just understand bad as something that, I mean, even if we had a preference against it, or we disvalued it, there would be a reason that we disvalue it. I'm thinking, yeah, yeah,
I'm not quite clear on what you're asking me. So
yeah,
you could, it's really going to depend. Like you could stipulate what you mean by terms. So you could say that there are experiential states that I'm going to stipulate by definition
yeah,
are states that are by stipulation are ones we don't desire. So
yeah.
any state you don't desire, you could say that that's a bad state.
Okay,
Is if by bad you mean it's not desired. And so there's a trivial sense in which you could get a kind of stipulative analyticity about suffering being bad. But what that's not going to get you is that it's bad independent of a stance. Uh, so I don't have a problem with someone saying, I'm going to use terminology to refer to experiences that are bad by definition. That seems fine.
yeah, and I'm even
But
yeah. Sorry, I think I was also thinking in terms of like the way that I'm thinking about it is if we're thinking about analytics or the ways that we're describing these terms, I think that the way that we define them and describe them is sort of contingent upon the way that they feel, right? So I'm not sure that like if for example, I don't know, Bob down the street from me like was he defines it differently. He defines all states of suffering as being something that is good. I think that um, his definition wouldn't really be corresponding to the sort of feltness of the experience. Like of course he might just have a different semantics to me, and he might think that he might refer to good as that kind of icky feeling. But I'm always thinking of the sort of like, for instance, we can take cruelty for example. I don't think that we would have a meaningful definition of cruelty unless it was the case that there were, whether they're other primates, bonobos or chimps or humans, that there's certain acts in which we impose, we dominate one another, and we sort of steal from one another, we beat each other up, example, like, so there's this physical and psychological dominance, and that sort of is where we derive our concepts from the actual like experiences. So yeah, I guess that's what I mean. I guess we could stipulate definitions and things, but I think that, let's just say we're tying, we're taking badness as a primitive and just saying we're applying that word to, this state that is undergone by any like conscious being, and I think that whether or not I think that state is good, and I'm meaning good in the sense of like it's a nice state to experience prior to stances, because I guess this will probably clear it up. Do you take stances to be something that's like agential? I know we talked a bit about stances already, but do you think that they're like
no,
agential?
so
Okay,
I
yeah,
have possibly a somewhat idiosyncratic view of
okay,
the stance
yeah.
stuff, which is that I don't even take stance to be psychological.
Oh, okay,
So I'll say a little bit, and it was something I
yeah,
was meaning to get back to.
yeah,
So I use the term stance very broadly to refer to
hmm,
really a type of indexicality, any standpoint from which one could, in principle, judge some normative standard or not. So,
hmm,
for instance, if you had an AI just randomly generate lists of normative standards and labeled them, list one, list two, list
yeah,
three, you could then go out in the world and look at a given set of actions and ask, are these actions consistent with or
hmm,
complying with rule list one, rule list two, rule list three?
yeah,
Oh, it complies with rule list two, but not rule list three.
hmm,
And those would be lists of rules that like nobody actually holds. There's not a
yeah,
person that endorses them.
hmm,
And so, but you could still judge things relative to those lists of rules, even though there's no agency involved. And so I use stance talk to just refer to, if you're going to make a normative evaluation, I think it can only be judged
yeah,
relative to or indexed to some standpoint of evaluation, regardless of whether anyone actually holds it or not.
okay,
So
yeah,
that's how I use the term.
yeah, that clears
It's
it
a
up.
way of sort of closing a grammatical loop.
Yeah,
So basically, my issue with your sort of standard realism
hmm,
is almost a grammatical issue.
yeah,
It's kind of like certain actions require certain things to be complete. You can't just put the shoes. You have to put the shoes in the closet or on the ground. You
yeah,
can't just put shoes. And so, just grammatically speaking, it requires you to put somewhere.
Yeah.
And likewise, I take normative language to not really be meaningful unless it's indexed to some standpoint of evaluation. But that doesn't require somebody to have the standard of evaluation.
Okay.
So it'd be a little weird, for instance, to say, okay, so I have stances, right? So I don't like people like wantonly torturing people for fun. So
Yeah.
it's wrong relative to my stance. But it wouldn't be like nonsensical or not make sense to say it would be wrong relative to like a hypothetical religion I could come up with.
Yeah.
And this is similar to how I could meaningfully say something like, oh, put the shoes in the closet. And the person could say, oh, but I don't have a closet.
Yeah.
Or, or you could say put the shoes away and not specify where. And there's any number of possible real and hypothetical locations that you could put things. It doesn't have to be a real and specified location. And so
Yeah.
I take stance talk to be capable of being meaningfully used in an open-ended way like that. But it's possible others have a more restrictive view where they require them to be like agentic and held by a person or something.
Yeah. So I guess we can ask. I guess I can ask like if we have like an individual that's being tortured very brutally, and someone has a positive stance or sentiment towards that suffering, and someone has a negative stance towards that suffering, you wouldn't think that either of them were like what you would say that they were both correct about their own sentiment or their own desire. They can't really be wrong about that, but there wouldn't be a fact of the matter independent of their perception. Would that be like
right?
Okay, so
Yeah, because and the reason for that is that you just take a sentence like it's good to torture them or it's right to torture them, and I just ask, what does that mean? Well, if the person means it's in accord with my preferences and it is accord with their preferences, then it's trivially true that it's right or it's good. But that's all that commits you to. Because it would just come out as saying something like, it's consistent with my preferences to torture people. Well, if there's some crazy person that likes torturing people, then that would be true.
Yeah.
But sometimes people leverage that to make it seem like I'm saying if it's true that it's okay for them to torture people, I'm okay with them torturing people, which of course is not the case.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about this in terms of like the suffering of the person in whom is being tortured, and then the two stances, both negative and positive towards it from each person on the opposing side. But I'm assuming that the individual who's undergoing suffering cannot have a preference for that suffering, right?
It depends what you mean by suffering. Like people can have a preference for pain.
Yeah, because that's a good point. I would make an asymmetry between pain. I think pain could be something like, for instance, a masochist could enjoy, undergoing. But
you see
pain.
how trivial it is if we just say, okay, well, by suffering I mean a state you disprefer, and then you say, well, it's you couldn't prefer to suffer. Well, of course not, because by definition it's something you don't prefer.
Right. So I guess the way I'm understanding suffering is broader, but not in a sort of terminological sense. Like I'm not sort of stipulating all of these different definitions, but rather the state of suffering just sort of I mean, I guess it almost sounds trivial in a meta-ethical discussion, but I think that the reason that we have these discussions and suffering is such a central figure of discussion is because that we sort of not intuitively in a definitional or analytical sense, but rather we've felt what it is to suffer, and we kind of know that that's not something that. And of course, there's instrumental suffering, there's intrinsic suffering. I'm talking primarily about suffering that's sort of an end in itself. It's not it's not going to the gym and breaking your muscles down, but just like you can think of a child's bone cancer, or like an animal having its throat slowly cut open or something, and just suffocating. Like these kinds of suffering, like I'm not even sure what like a sort of I'm not sure like what someone having a positive stance towards that would be, and how that would be like a moral fact. Like I almost feel like that would be a sentimental fact, but or some sort of preference fact. But I think of morality concerning like so I'm indexing the ought here to the sort of, I feel like an ought is going to arise phenomenologically, right? Like in this state of the animal that's undergoing suffering, or the being that's undergoing suffering. Like I think that suffering itself sort of has this sort of like intrinsic oughtness in a sense, that's like the way I'm thinking about it. And so yeah, I can't tell you, for instance, that you should care. Like, for instance, someone that may not be vegan, or someone that may not care about holocausting individual humans, right? Like, I can't tell them that they should care, but I certainly know that the victims who are undergoing the suffering care, and that just seems like an ontological fact independent of my stance, you know. Yeah,
Yeah, I get that.
but
I
yeah,
just don't think that way.
yeah,
I don't think luckness or anything like that could be built into our experiences or states.
yeah,
So I think that to the extent that we have, experiences of a given kind,
yeah,
there is a conceptual distinction between the experience itself and whatever attitude or evaluative stance we take towards the experience. I don't think that
yeah.
evaluations or stances can be like sort of built
Intrinsic.
into or baked into the experience itself. And
Okay.
there are people that do think that that's the case, and maybe that's a position you hold.
Yeah.
I don't know. But if you're interested in somebody that has a view like that, Sharon Hewitt Roulette does
Hmm.
have a view like that. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
heard of her before.
Yeah, I've not heard of her. I'll have to check out her work because I don't think it's a common view that I hear, but I think some sort of realists, like non-naturalist realists, do
Oh,
have
I
this
don't think
more.
it's that uncommon.
Oh, okay.
Philip
Yeah.
Goff would probably hold that view.
Oh, okay, yeah. Because I mean, I typically think of non-naturalist realists of having this very sort of like stance independent, like sort of very they might ground it in something that is entirely mind independent, but mine's very like ontologically mind dependent. It's just that it's you couldn't help but have it. So it's yeah. So I guess it's like a phenomenological realism in a sense. Like, but I wonder when I say it's like baked in or intrinsic. Like I'm trying to think how I could cash that out. Like I guess because I think that animal suffering can be bad. I mean, I take it that we think suffering is, like it's going to be irreducibly normative. At least to me, it's irreducibly normative. So an animal can suffer, and I think that they're going to the aversiveness that they have is sort of normative in it. I suppose. I guess how are we like understanding evaluative? Like, are we thinking about that in some sort of like descriptive agential sense, or can that also just be experiential? Yeah.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
think the former. I don't know how that could be experiential.
Yeah.
I don't know what
Because
that would mean.
yeah. Well, maybe you could be like a small like a small child that has like certain they might not have like refined like propositional knowledge, but they do have a strong intuitive sense of what should and should not be happening, but they may not even be. It's almost like instinctual. I think that's the way that I think of normativity, and I actually disagreed with like Akil Bilgrami on this because I had a conversation with him and like yeah he is a moral realist but or like a value realist, and he doesn't like he wants to say that for instance uh, there are certain states of affairs that the cruel but agency is required to like identify like stance independent and cruel sort of facts in the world, but an animal is not an agent because they don't have propositional knowledge, therefore they don't have like thoughts, therefore like they don't they can't really be bad. But I don't it was strange. I was sort of exploring that, but I couldn't really get on board with that view because I don't know, I have this like very I don't know, it's really hard to explicate what I'm trying to get at, but I'm trying to sort of disentangle my thoughts. um I guess like I guess one way I could put it is you would think that let's just say that you like Lance, you have like a desire against like vulnerable individuals like suffering. I'm assuming that there are facts about your psychology that would instantiate that preference, but also facts about what it means for that being to undergo suffering would like instantiate that preference as well. Like if anything, there's very much a sort of relationality there, and I'm not. That may sound trivial, but to me, it's there seems to be something about the state of suffering, whoever is suffering, um, that we recognize like its badness constitutively. Like maybe you see what I'm getting at. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I understand that that's a view
yeah,
people hold.
yeah.
That's separate from why we might hold it or what the arguments for that
Yeah,
might be. Yeah, I don't really have a problem with what the view is.
yeah. So, do you think that let me just I'm thinking about like how I could phrase it in a different way. Like yeah, I think what do you think would like yeah? Because if you think that something is bad, like what do you think would give you such a view? If it's purely like psychological, because I think to be like a practical agent, we would be responding to like reasons in the world, whether they're normative reasons or they would make sort of, you know, that would sort of instantiate a normative commitment on us, as opposed to like our mind just sort of, you know, functioning in like a vacuum and like sort of, you know, um, picking up all these normative reasons just purely based on these desires. Like I think that the world itself would give us these desires, right? It's hard for me to explicate what I'm trying to mean, but I think I'm getting at probably value realism at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, like let me try get at it. Like
Sure.
so if we consider you remember what I was saying before specifically about when we assess a belief, like we usually look outward and see if the belief tracks what truly is the case, right? Or rather,
Uh-huh.
you know, like whether you hold to correspondence, whether identity theory, like you know, deflationary theory, the how things really are, like whether it's, you know, that's what we're trying to get at, and I think the same can be said for like values, right? Even if we're thinking of these like aesthetic properties, like I'm not sure what it would mean for like it would almost to me reduce down to like our minds themselves as sort of like just it's like almost like an epistemic fiction, right? That we're just like sort of hallucinating like values, you know? Like I'm not sure why I would see, for instance, I mean, this is touching on aesthetic realism a bit, but like a beautiful painting, why I would consider it beautiful if there wasn't something contained within the painting that would actually, you know, sort of make me have such a preference for it, you know? Like I'm not, yeah, that's my intuition. I mean, I know you may have completely different intuitions, but I'm not sure what your views are on like aesthetic realism and stuff. But yeah.
I'm not a realist about any normative stuff.
Oh, okay, okay. So you're like very much a normative anti-realist, yeah.
Yeah, global normative anti-realist. My issue really is with irreducible normativity. I just don't think they're just like are normative properties.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, what sort of makes you feel that way? Like, because I think, yeah,
It's really a conceptual issue. I think that I don't know that I really think all everything has to be descriptive, but I think
yeah,
that the notion of irreducible normativity, like it doesn't really make sense. So normativity, like I don't actually think there is such a thing as normativity. I think of norms as a type of descriptive thing. So like a crude way to put it would be that I think that there are only descriptive facts, and so if there are normative facts, they've got to be a type of descriptive fact, and uh, just on conceptual grounds. And so normative realism would just be ruled out purely on conceptual grounds.
okay, yeah, I do know. So if we're speaking about like the Azort gap, you sort of would take it that an ort would like, because I do know a lot of people that speak about orts in this kind of way that they can be reduced down to some. I mean, this is getting a little bit into like I guess philosophy of mind as far as I can tell, like because we could say that in the same sense of the way that you may experience the sensation of love or whatever, like it can be reduced down to something like oxytocin, or like my feelings could be reduced down to like brain states, but I'm not sure that it's a view that I would be like inclined to take, because, well, the way that I'm thinking about this is that let's think about like what currently is the case now. We of course we can get at the Azort gap and Hume's guillotine. Like I can think about certain states of affairs in the world. I'm not sure whether I can ever tell anyone else what they should or should not do. Like I don't think I don't think that's possible. I think it is something that's indexed to my private agency, or my private conscious states. But I do think that experientially there's a difference between what is the case and what I believe I should do, and when I'm engaging with the world as an agent. Like I feel like I'm aware of the fact that that what I currently believe doesn't necessarily dictate what I should do going forward. And of course, it's hard because if I'm trying to invoke the word should and I'm trying to explain, like what is the property of a should, I almost feel like it's indescribable, like that's it's kind of like a sui generis
Yeah,
property. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's my main issue with it. I don't
Yeah.
really think that there are. So I don't know if you've read much of the stuff in my blog. I don't have published papers on
Hmm.
this. All my published stuff has been mostly on empirical things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's mostly blog stuff. But I have an issue with the idea of like concepts, the content of which is like ineffable or incommunicable. I
Yeah.
don't really think concepts work that way. And I think
Okay.
that when we're unable to communicate things, either it's because there isn't a concept present that we don't like, we're confused and we think we have a
Yeah.
concept when we don't,
Yeah.
or because we just haven't been able to successfully articulate it. And I don't know how to show that that's true. I don't really have a good argument for that.
Yeah.
And I acknowledge that I'm not an expert in philosophy of language.
Yeah.
But what I'll note about this is that you imagine how a conversation goes. You ask someone what they mean by some technical concept in philosophy. They give a partial account. They give a metaphor or an analogy, and you're like, okay, well, your metaphor isn't really helping me get there.
Yeah.
And so sometimes they'll conclude, well, the problem is you, and it certainly could be. Sometimes people will mock me by saying, oh, Lance claiming he doesn't understand something isn't a good reason to think it's not a real concept.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with that.
Yeah,
Of
yeah.
course I think that. I don't think my personal inability to understand something means it doesn't make sense. But there's a big difference between like a random person not understanding something and the thing not being capable of being understood in the relevant sort of sense at all. Imagine there was a part in cars that no mechanic, engineer, or physicist in the world could explain what it was or how
Yeah.
it worked. Wouldn't you be suspicious of that? They could explain all the other ones, just not that one.
Yeah.
I think I would be suspicious of that. I
Yeah.
would wonder whether either they're very confused or they're lying or something funny is going on. And so when we have certain concepts that just spontaneously, for no apparent reason, we're unable to explain what they mean, I think that should raise a red flag instead of just assuming that the concept is inexplicable. Like, how did they determine that the concept is inexplicable rather than that they fail to explain it? How is this determined typically? As far as I know, there is no formal procedure or even an informal procedure. It's just that in dialectical contexts where people find themselves unable to explain the concept, they'll just declare that it's an inexplicable concept or it's ineffable.
Yeah. Oh, I
How
see.
did they determine that?
I see what you're getting at.
I find that suspicious.
Yeah.
They just say so. How do they know?
Yeah. You might. I hope you don't feel like I'm mischaracterizing your view, but I feel like my intuitions are that potentially there's a way in which we're well, normativity is going to be understood as something that of course is a sui generis property, as something that cannot be explained, reduced to our like our psychological accounts or our descriptive accounts, etc. And I think that, or dispositions, and I think that is why potentially it's difficult to believe in such a property, because that we're looking through the lens of these like a descriptive explanation, and we're saying like what does it even mean to say that I have some normative reason to believe X? Or for example, when like all I can see here is like the car parts and the engine and the fuel and etc. And I'm breaking down all of these like spatial temporal like like concrete states of affairs in the world, and I can't see the reason anywhere. But I feel like the reason is something that, of course, it's not like spatially located in any meaningful sense, but it's rather like it's something that it's experienced insofar as like I mean, you might just outright deny this, but it's like you might give an analogy or an assessment pertaining to like a car and all of its parts, and you might think that you have a reason to believe that you might believe that you have a reason to believe in the lack of like these normative properties, and that reason is through the negation of knowing what they even are. But I feel like it's perfectly coherent to say that you have a reason as such, and that's through lack of seeing any sort of descriptive account. But I think that maybe it's just like a peculiar thing for you to envision something like that. But I guess the last thing I'd want to say is that if I think that if we're okay with like doing away, I suppose, with saying that there's no like fact that I should follow evidence according to my my agential states, and there's no like and avoid certain contradictions and prefer truth over falsehood and all of these things, then, or that I have normative reasons for doing such, indexed to my normative commitments, like, yeah, like I guess then that would be fine, and I would agree. But I think that it doesn't. Yeah, like I think if we are describing it, it is sui generis because it can't be defined. But I think that's the very notion of what it means. But I do experience reasons in my day-to-day life. I think that's what it means to like be a practical agent. But I know that some people do reject practical agency, especially like hard determinists and things like that. So maybe you fit into that camp. I'm not sure. Yeah.
I wouldn't call myself a hard determinist. I don't even know if determinism is true.
Yeah.
But I tend not to believe in moral responsibility.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I like the pragmatic accounts, like some of the way that P.F. Strawson describes like reactive attitudes, and if we're going to have any kind of like free will, I think I just think of it as agency. Like if anything, we can do away with the term free will if we're just talking about agency, which is how I understand it. Like some people have agency.
Yeah, I think a lot of problems are solved by getting rid of the term. I don't. Compatibilists remind me of naturalist realists in some respects, where it's like they want to be able to say, I believe in free will, but the thing that they're talking about is. One, it's just something that we obviously trivially have if we're talking about like Dennett's view of like reason responsiveness. Obviously, there's a psychological difference between some agents and others where they're more responsive to reasons, where they're capable of being deterred. That it's trivially true that that's the case. And I think that trivializes traditional disputes like, do we have free will? Do we live in socially constructed societies in which we hold one another accountable and can judge one another on the basis of psychological differences and make judgments about our agency? Well, yes, obviously. Clearly we have that ability. So the answer to that question is yes, we do have free will. And it's a useful notion, but I struggle with calling that free will.
Yeah. I think
it just strikes me as strange.
Yeah, I think Dennett tries to get at, like he talks about, believe he has a book, Elbow Room, and he talks about like the varieties of free will worth wanting, right?
Worth wanting.
Yeah, then like I do see what he's getting at, but then I think it's fair to say, okay, look, I see free will as like not a metaphysical feature, but a pragmatic tool, and I have this pragmatic account, and I think agency is something valuable. Okay, I like thumbs up, I can get on board with all of that. But then sometimes he'll say that we should allow people to have these sort of like libertarian interpretations of free will where they think that they're like the cause of their internal states or whatever, just because it might give them cause them psychological distress if we retract that sort of illusion. And it's I'm not sure that's a good way to defend free will, Yeah, so I got what you mean. I know we're derailing a little bit, but I guess I was just curious because I understand normativity as being tied up with agency, So I was wondering whether you how you defend agency, stripped of normativity.
Yeah, it would just in a practical sense, it would be some psychological account of how people operate and what's useful to make a society function the way that does.
Yeah. So
it would be pretty boring and mundane.
Yeah. So do you think that a sort of do you think that a descriptive account of certain brain states for example would be in a sense identical with the experience that you have that maybe I have reasons to
I don't know if I'd say that.
Yeah.
I like the phrase consciousness is as consciousness does. So I have a view like a functionalist.
Okay.
And I would draw a distinction between what something is and what something does.
Okay.
And so I would be reluctant to say that conscious states are a physical event rather than something like an abstraction or description of what the physical thing is doing.
Okay, yeah, I think that's reasonable. Because I wanted to I don't want to take up too much of your time, so please let me know if I'm eating into too much of it. But I am, and I think I may have seen that you potentially aversive to talk because you've had many conversations about illusionism. But I'm genuinely just curious about the view, and as you can see, I'm not trying to debate you or anything like that. But
yeah,
I am curious because I tend to be like I think
So there
yeah
actually, it's one of the rare cases where there's actually a name and a
yeah
paper on the view. Not my own paper, but have you read Pete Mandick's paper on qualia quietism?
I've not no
Okay, so that is what you'd want to check out. It's a
okay
relatively short paper. It's relatively straightforward.
hmm
If you need me to send you a link or something after this,
that'd be
I'd
great
be
yeah
happy to do that. But basically, I think qualia is the other main concept that falls into this category of ineffable concepts that I
okay
reject on the grounds that I don't think there are ineffable concepts.
yeah
So, qualia quietism is the view that
hmm
use of the term qualia or phenomenal state, Mandic uses them interchangeably, and some
yeah
people do, some people don't.
hmm
Um, it's so fraught with inconsistent and mixed usages that it doesn't really pick out any particular phenomenon or concept or thing at all. And what he proposes is that there's just, it's not so much that qualia don't exist, but that people can't even pin down what it is they're talking about
yeah
in a sufficiently coherent way for us to even have a discussion about whether it exists. And when you unravel all the confusion and layers of people not really knowing what they mean, there's just nothing there. You pull back the curtain, and it's like the Wizard of Oz. There is no magic, and that's how I feel about the qualia talk and consciousness talk.
yeah
It's not that I think people have a coherent idea on the table, but we don't have that. It's that I don't even think something coherent is being stated in the first place.
yeah
A lot of people don't like that view. It seems very, it's
yeah
like, oh, so you're saying everybody is confused and wrong? Well, some people take offense to that, but I find it very strange because think about it. The
hmm
reason I think a lot of these concepts, like a lot of philosophical issues,
hmm
are pseudo problems where once you understand the relevant linguistic or conceptual issues causing
yeah
the problem goes away. So it's not that the answer is A or not A within
yeah
the particular dialectic, but that there is no answer to A or not A. A bit like if we were all trying to figure out like how to appease the sun god who wants us to do human sacrifice, like do we carve their hearts out,
yeah
or does the god want their liver? Well, the answer is such a god probably doesn't exist. So there is no answer to which part of the body it wants us to burn when we make a
yeah
sacrifice, because it's not a real thing.
yeah
And so, if philosophical problems are like that, then there's no answer to these questions. And I think a lot of philosophical problems are like that. And I think sometimes people don't like that because it kind of takes away the fun of the dispute.
yeah
But sometimes people take offense to that because they take, oh, this is not meaningful or nonsensical, to be like disparaging the people that hold the views. And
hmm
that is very much not the case. Because if you think about it, the reason why I think people are subject to these like conceptual confusions
hmm
is because they have the sort of wrong methods.
yeah
Now, if they had the right methods, I think they would figure things out more readily. The alternative is that people are using the right methods, but then they're all just wrong and getting everything consistently wrong anyway.
yeah
How is that the more flattering description of people? So, oh, you're using the right methods. You're just so stupid. You're always wrong anyway.
yeah yeah no I see what you're
That's
getting
not
at
a better
yeah
view of people.
yeah I see what you're getting at I think my struggle with illusionism might just be confusion on my part because I don't really I find Daniel Dennett to be quite unclear on the matter, and for myself personally, maybe that's just my own confusion, failure on my part. But I think that as far as I can tell, it's a rejection of phenomenal consciousness. But I'm not clued in on whether, like, is it a sort of necessary condition of phenomenology that you accept that there are these intrinsic and ineffable, like independent qualitative states, because I would be inclined to not reject the what its likeness, as you could call it, of experience if it weren't the case, but I would be willing to accept that it's all interdependent. Like I don't, like if anything, a sort of like Nagarjuna sort of sense of the way that sort of Jay Garfield at least speaks about like independence. Interdependence between these sort of phenomenal states, but then he does reject phenomenal consciousness altogether, and I think. Yeah, I wonder like if you could help me like understand that because I'm very confused on the matter. Like I feel
What
like
is it that you want to understand?
yeah, I want to understand like why the rejection, I suppose, of phenomenological consciousness, other than like it's hard to define. Because if we're saying that it is, let's just say okay, it is undefinable, but qualia is just it quite literally is the feltness of experience. I know that may sound trivial if we're defining it in that sense, or we're attempting to define it, but it is something that isn't captured by definition in a sense. Like for me, if what it means to have even knowledge of something would be there would be a prior state of like being aware of that knowledge, right? Which is something that would be bound up with whatever we want to call it, consciousness, phenomenology, qualia, So that's what I'm wondering. Like, are we eliminating that state entirely, or are we just eliminating like intrinsic, ineffable qualia? Like, I guess that's what I'm asking. Yeah.
Yeah, so Dennett has a very specific view where what he thinks is that people take their phenomenology to involve apparent access to this private, ineffable, qualitative aspect of experience.
Yeah.
And he doesn't think that that's necessary to describe experience. As far as your confusion about his views, I don't think that's just you.
Yeah.
I think it's generally appreciated that he was not the best expositor of his views.
Okay.
And that's rather unfortunate.
Yeah.
The kind of inheritor of the mantle of explaining Dennett's views is Keith Frankish, and unfortunately, I don't think he's a great expositor either.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I think that the position has been left without an especially gifted expositor of the view to explain it. And that's very unfortunate because it's a subtle and interesting perspective that I think deserves to be treated with respect and taken seriously. And unfortunately, it's been subject to quite a bit of ridicule as well.
Yeah.
But I think it would be beyond the scope of what we could achieve in a discussion now for me to try to unpack it for you.
Okay, yeah.
So, I would say just go read what he says, but I actually think it's rather opaque and kind of difficult to understand.
Yeah, that's how I found it. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we definitely don't have
Look,
to.
He's not Kant, so if you can get through some harder stuff, he's manageable.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah, because no, that's been my main core issue is disentangling like what he's trying to get at. But I've seen a lot of content by him. I've seen numerous debates and things like that. But he's definitely entertaining to watch. Like I find him almost funny. But like I don't know, the guy just seemed like he could have had like a second career in like comedy. Daniel Dennett. I don't know why the guy's hilarious. But
oh yeah, he's a funny guy. I don't know if you know I was a student of Dennett's.
No, I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. Yeah, is that what attracted you?
I did my master's at Tufts. He was a professor there. You take 11 courses at Tufts. I did 4 of my courses with him, so I took more than a third of my graduate training with.
Oh man, that's so cool, man. Yeah, so like, do you think that's what sort of? Because as far as I know, you are very like empirical based, there, and I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he had an influence on you there. I'm not sure.
He didn't have a big influence on me. I kind of already came there pretty much on the path towards what I ended up doing. I took a lot of courses with him. He wasn't really, I don't think he was a huge fan of me personally. That's unfortunate, and he wasn't a fond of my writing. There's a comment he left on one of my papers that still stays with me. He said this was a trudge to get through.
Oh, damn, dude. Yeah, that's like brutal, yeah.
It's harsh. Well, yeah, but you know what? Harsh feedback is good. I like getting it. I just liked what I wrote and was happy with it. I've written some real trudges, and maybe that one was longer than it needed to be, but I was like, geez, that's rough. But, what kind of made it unfortunate for me is that it was an independent study, and I was the one that designed the course. I wrote the syllabi, I made my own course, and then he taught me the course that I made for myself. And he, 2 other students joined me for the course.
Yeah.
And he was much more excited about them than he was about me. Now, I could say, how dare he, but the 2 people in question are so brilliant and awesome. I'm kind of like, all right, well, fair enough.
Yeah.
So it was 2 friends of mine, and they're both just absolutely brilliant people. So
yeah, no,
fair enough.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think
there were a lot of phenomenal students at Tufts.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And one of those students has gone on to develop on Dennett's views himself, so that's pretty cool.
Oh, okay, yeah, that is pretty cool, yeah. I always got like the vibe from Dennett that he might have a sort of like impatient side to him, like he just if he thinks personally that something is bullshit, he's just not going to stand for it, The guy.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
I think he just didn't really have the same interests as me, and that was the main issue.
Yeah.
And I don't think he was particularly thrilled with my approach. So, and especially then, my approach was very neurotically methodical,
Yeah.
and that stayed through my approach for my dissertation.
Mm-hmm.
So my dissertation took 3 years, and I absolutely obsessed over it. I read everything I possibly could on the topic. I got severe burnout that lasted over a year afterwards. I mean, it forever changed me going through that process. But my dissertation, I had to give a shorter 200-page version to my committee, just to make it of tolerable length, and that was the largest I figured they would accept.
Yeah.
But the full dissertation, you can see it online. It's 1,249 pages.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's a hefty one.
So
Yeah.
when he said this was a trudge to get through, I can kind of understand where he's coming from.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I do think that there's a time and place for the kind of obsessive work that I did.
Yeah.
So I'm
No.
proud of it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. That is hefty. But I mean.
But yeah, as far as his views go, consciousness explained is where you would want to go. It might require a couple readings to get through.
Yeah.
But I'm not up for explaining it now. I think we're probably running up towards the end of our time. But if you want me to talk about that view sometime, I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah.
I'm not great
Yeah.
at expositing it myself, and it's not even my view. I hold an adjacent kind of view, but I can do my best.
Yeah, no, I mean that would be fine. Yeah, I guess the only question I have, like before we wrap up here, is if you think that phenomenology can be referring to something that's sort of not specifically this intrinsic, ineffable, independent state, or what? Or
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So, the thing is, though, and I'm very much in the Dennett spirit like this. I'm a bit of a neo-behaviorist. So,
Yeah.
like the kinds of things people think is going on with phenomenology, I don't actually think are going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we're moist robots, to use the unpleasant terminology.
Yeah.
And basically, very roughly, what I would say I think is going on with consciousness is that one of the useful functions that organisms like us have exhibited
Yeah.
is a capacity to create a kind of simulated sense of a self.
Yeah.
And that's what our actual sense of a self is. It is that simulation. And so basically, what the self is a kind of useful fictional construction that we've adapted to employ because of the various social and other sorts of behaviors that we exhibit. And so it's a kind of consciousness partially involves, at least human consciousness partially involves, a kind of fictional useful construction. And Dennett describes it as a narrative center of gravity around which we could hang our various experiences, thoughts, and so on. Now, I see that as a rather integral component to consciousness, but sometimes people will say, no, that's not what consciousness is. You're talking about personal identity, not consciousness.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
I think it's hard to quite understand what human consciousness would be like if it didn't include that component.
Yeah.
Then again, I am aware, and you mentioned Buddhist stuff earlier,
That's right. Yeah.
that one can be in a state of mind where one experiences what seems to be consciousness without the ego.
That's right.
And I know because I've experienced that myself. I did a bit of meditation when I was younger.
Yeah.
And I was successful early on and then not so much later. I was able to get in a state of mind where like my flow of consciousness was actually separated from my sense of self in a very visceral and memorable way. So
that's right.
I think there's some tricky stuff for me to have to work out there.
Yeah, I think
regarding the difference.
If it's okay, I'll quickly say I've had the same experience, and I think maybe there is just a lot of miscommunication. Yeah, because I think that if anything, a lot of almost someone like Galen Strawson just seems to be saying, okay, like if the simulation is maybe it is a simulation, but consciousness is the thing which is primary, but he still denies the self, and a lot of people think it's wrapped up with like the Cartesian theater kind of thing, and it's like I think there's just like a lot of confusion on both sides, Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah. But yeah, not sure if there's anything else you wanted to add, but nonetheless, I appreciate your time, and I did enjoy the conversation.
Yeah, I feel like we'd probably need to have another one if you wanted to get more into my realist views. So I feel one thing people don't, I think, appreciate is that really getting in depth on stuff often requires like actual multiple hours of communication.
Yeah.
I'm not telling you that you need to do that with me,
Yeah.
but I just know what it's like because I had philosophy graduate student roommates,
Yeah.
and what it's like to get to understand a person's view after you've talked with them for like 40 hours versus 40 minutes.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
it's a radically different thing.
That's right.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to talk. Yeah, I'd love to
and,
talk again. And I'm not like you can tell I'm not very educated on this topic. I'm just really curious and I like learning. So yeah, I'd enjoy it. Yeah.
yeah, so let me just ask before we
Mhm.
end this conversation, like what is it that you do? Are you like a philosophy student, or is it just something you study for fun?
Yeah, it's primarily like I so I study. I would say I study independently. I'm looking at like online access courses currently, but I've just spent like the last few years sort of like reading primarily normative ethics, applied ethics and meta ethics, of course, and it kind of just started off as like a casual thing for me, and then I just had the idea. I was like, why don't I just like sort of, get at least relatively well read on some of this stuff, and I'm still a long way off even considering myself. Well, I've noticed that the more I learn, the more I feel unsure about myself, and yeah, I just had the idea to just kind of reach out to like some of these people, like reached out to some ethicists and things, like Bill Gramy, being one of them, Sylvia Pinizza, who's been inspired heavily by Iris Murdoch and Simone Weil and people like that. And I've just had like sort of interviews with them, and it's been incredibly helpful at expanding my knowledge as far as I can tell. And I've thought to do the same with you, because I was like, I think it would make for an interesting conversation. So yeah, I'm not like a sort of major or like a sort of, I wouldn't even consider myself like well informed or well read on the topic. I love engaging with it. I find it almost addictive. But yeah, just to answer your question.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
I would say that feeling never stops. That the more you learn, the more you feel like you need to learn. But it
Yeah.
probably does stop for some people where they
Yeah.
don't think they need to learn anymore. But everything I've read, I just feel even more ignorant. It just every
Yeah,
time you
that's
read a book, it feels like there's 5 more books you should read.
That's
And,
right. Yeah. That's
it's I don't even make an attempt anymore, given that I do interdisciplinary stuff. It's not even like, oh, there's more philosophy to read. Well, I could read the entire field of anthropology. I could read there's so many other whole fields that I'm not even paying attention to, that
Yeah.
it just feels kind of hopeless to
Yeah.
even think I'll ever, get that far into it.
Yeah, that's right. Because I feel like I've sometimes even mocked, like I've been one of these people that have mocked certain views. Whether those are like religious views, which are quite easy for me to mock, or even like illusionism, which you might hate me for. But like I think if anything, I acknowledge my own ignorance, that like I may just need to actually read about this view more. But I think we're all like potentially guilty of that. So I try to at least expand my knowledge and acknowledge that I may be wrong about things. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
What I'll say about illusionism is, even if people reject it, they shouldn't mock it.
yeah,
It's a interesting and cool view.
yeah, yeah,
It's more sophisticated than people might appreciate, and I don't mean that in a pretentious way. I
for
mean
sure.
it in like a
Yeah,
it's got more going for it than I think people fully appreciate.
yeah,
And it should people shouldn't mock it. Reject it, sure. Mock
yeah,
it, it's not the view to do that.
yeah.
I used to do that with dualism, and now I kind of regret that. I probably shouldn't mock dualism.
Yeah, because it stops philosophy being about actually like coming to mutual agreements, or at least like respectful disagreements in discourse, and rather just becomes like a shouting match. And I think Discord personally, I think, can be quite particularly bad for that. Like if you go in any like politics server or anything, it's just a bloodbath of people, like just some of them like awful, like most awful philosophical debates that I've seen. Yeah, I just I care about learning, really. I'm not like super into debates, even though they can be entertaining sometimes. So, but yeah, I will.
I've seen some pretty repugnant stuff there myself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But once again, yeah, I really appreciate your time, and I'd be more than willing to have a chat again, and I'll probably do some more reading in
Yeah,
between.
give it a few months to
Cool.
talk to other people and let things percolate, and
Yeah.
then feel free to get in touch again.
All right, yeah, thanks a lot, Lance. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks. I actually really appreciate you having a talk with me. I've been mostly just taking care of a baby the whole summer, so
Oh
I
man.
haven't really gone anywhere to talk to people. So I enjoyed it. Thank you.
No, yeah, you're good, man. Yeah. I hope you have a nice rest of your day, and I'll speak to you again in a few months. Take care. Bye.
Yeah, take care. Bye.